Good evening, councillors. The clock has just rung, so we'll make a stop. You obviously didn't hear it. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor John Perry, Chairman of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee and to those who are on the hybrid version, if I may use that. Before we commence proceedings, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. I have to say, the years I've been here, that statement always slightly amuses me because I'm just wondering whether we all press the panic button and go rushing out at the same time, but doesn't matter. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that any members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Okay? I would also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of the microphones and to remind them to turn their microphone off when they have finished speaking. Okay. So we'll go straight to agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillors Janetta Sams and Travinsky. Are there any other apologies do we have? I don't see any. Good. Okay. Are there any substitute members? Councillor Clark.
Councillor Mumford for Councillor Sams.
Thank you. And
good evening, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Garton for Councillor Travinsky.
Thank you. Agenda items 3, urgent items. You'll see there's an additional agenda item actually, which wasn't in the original published agenda. And I've agreed to take the external auditor's audit progress report as an urgent item, as this was not available when the agenda was published. I also intend to take the progress report together with the report of the Senior Finance Manager relating to the annual accounts for 2020-21, as it does impact upon the recommendations contained within that report. This is quite an important item. We'll come to it, agenda item 17. Are we all okay with that? I assume we are. Okay. Visiting members, are there any visiting members? I do not see any. Disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? I see none. Good. Disclosures of lobbying. Has anybody been lobbied? No? Okay. I haven't either, so that's fine. To consider agenda item 7, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. You all okay with that? Good. Minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of July 2021. I move the minutes of the meeting held on 28th of July 2021 be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 9, question and answer sessions for members of the public. There are no questions for members of the public this evening. Item 10, there are no questions from members to me as chairman this evening. So that's good. Hello, Rich. No, you've got stuck. It's okay. We're only on agenda item 10 actually at the moment, so, and the rest of the form are relatively formal, so okay. We'll go straight to agenda item 11, which is the committee work programme, which is on page 12. Does anybody have any comments on this? Okay, I just have one comment myself on the chair, if I may, and it's just really just a question. It's at the end, you've got an update on draft model code of conduct. This is quite an important item, I think. I was wondering, there's no specific date on this. I'd like to push this a little bit forward up the agenda if that was possible, because there are some issues that I think we need to address on that, and I'd like to have that a bit further up if that's possible. I'll ask the question now, and obviously you can come back in a later meeting. Are we all okay with that? Councillor Cox.
It's a very good point, Mr. Chairman, but would it be better if it was brought just before the usual time that people would have AGMs, so it could be considered and then carried forward, or else we're going to miss something perhaps being adopted? So when is the usual time for parishes, etc., that might have an AGM, so it could be carried to that?
Thank you. Yeah, they do vary a bit, don't they? So, but can I just leave it slightly open, and then we'll come back to it. It's not something we're dying a ditch on, but I'm sure Democratic Services will follow that one up. Yeah, okay, that's great. Okay, let's move on. Okay, agenda item 13, which is the annual accounts 2021. And I'll call upon the head of finance, Ellie Dunnett. I think Ellie's on the screen. Have I missed 12?
Chairman.
Oh gosh, complaints. I do apologise. I saw. No. Are there any complaints? I do apologise, and I know Jane Bayliss is on the hybrid. I always miss the hybrid. I'm sorry. Do you want to say anything on this?
Thank you, Chair.
I do apologise to you. I didn't mean to miss you.
No problem. It's Mr. Rowland that's here to introduce the report and take any questions.
Okay. Is it?
Hello, Chairman. Can you hear me?
I got it. Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So my report tonight provides an update to the committee on complaints received under the Code of Conduct and covers the period 1st of March 2021 to the 30th of August 2021. At the Audit and Governance Committee on the 30th of March, it was reported that all outstanding complaints had been resolved. Since the last meeting, the monitoring officer has received a further 6 complaints. 5 of the complaints relate to parish or town councillors, and 1 complaint relates to a borough councillor, and the status of each complaint is set out at section 2.6 of the report. Section 2.7 of the report sets out a brief update on the Model Code of Conduct that's currently being considered by Kent County Council. Members are asked to please note the report, and myself and Jane are happy to take any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. This report is for noting, but does anybody wish to raise any comments? I think Councillor Cooling first, then Councillor Garden. Thank you.
I was close first. But,
Yes, it was almost a dead heat. Sorry.
I have a couple of questions, please, or a couple of comments on the report itself, but then I have some... Sorry? It is on, yeah? Can you hear it now? Are you all right? Shut up. You want me to shout? Seriously? Seriously, can you hear me or not? Yes, okay, that's fine. So a couple of points. Firstly, on para 2.6, at some point, could we be briefed, and maybe I should know them already, what the preliminary tests are that are applied? So can we receive that by email, please? Secondly, under 2.7, an absolute yes to A and B being considered. And thirdly, on the report, a plea again. Can we have early sight of the draft, even if KCC hasn't agreed it? They can put draft all over the top of it, but we'd actually like to see how it's shaping up. But then, if I may, rather more seriously, a very important comment. Yesterday evening, my colleague Peter practitioner, or teachers I think you referred to at times, we were 2 of the 24 on a remote Maidstone area calc meeting. And I'd like to say that the vast majority of parish councillors take their role as seriously as members do. And we are rather disappointed, to say the least, that if the new standard doesn't come out saying something about sanctions on parish councillors and members, if you will, on parish councillors who are found wanting. Secondly, we urge strongly that at some point during the assessment of a complaint, an allegation of complaint, that the anonymity that is afforded to the possible culprit is sacrificed, i.e., certainly when it comes to the conclusion, we should know who it was. Because we hear apocryphal stories of some unfortunate incidents where perhaps individuals should end up being found wanting, should be named and shamed, and perhaps should cease in their role. And thirdly, although I'm sure officers would recommend that breaches of the law should not be part of a complaint, they should be the subject of the courts. Well, come on, let's get reasonable. Legal process through legal jurisdiction can be very long-winded. So we would also like to ask the legal officer considers whether or not the grounds for a complaint can be breach of the law as well as code of conduct. But to repeat the pattern, Peter, say if I've got this wrong, parish councils take this extremely seriously, and we really want to see this code of conduct beefed up so that the reputation of parish councillors, you can do it for members as well if you wish, parish council reputations are not tarnished by the number of complaints that we see recorded at these meetings. Thank you.
Chairman, would you like me to pick up those points?
I would, yes, very much. Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
Certainly we can send you the part of the Constitution about the jurisdiction tests. It's clearly set out within the Code of Conduct. On the other points, the Kent secretaries, so the whole of Kent's monitoring officers, have considered KCC's first draft, and I believe they are yet to consider that. When we get to the point of having a amended version that we can recommend, it will come to members as soon as possible. You will understand it has to have the whole of Kent being consistent if possible, and so minor tweaks wouldn't go into the main draft template, because that would be take an inordinate amount of time, and each council and parish council can take their own views on a template. And with regard to all the matters about calc, it's good to hear that the parishes are concerned and do want to carry out their roles correctly, which I'm sure we all wish to promote. But unfortunately, as I have explained before, the sanctions and other serious matters that the parish councillor refers to cannot be changed with a redraft of the Code of Conduct. They require changes to legislation. They were recommendations of the Parliamentary Committee for Standards in Public Life, and there is due to be a government consultation which has been said to be imminent which will set out what legislation the government is proposing, and we will be able to comment on that. And it's at that point, I would say that the parish councils should make their feelings known so that legislation can enable more severe sanctions if that is what they wish to see. So I hope that assists, Chairman.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive response, but I'll give Councillor Cooling a chance to come back on that one.
And apologies, Patrick. Yes, we were faced with a local government LGA draft, I've lost track of time, 18 months ago, which was absolute rubbish in structure and content. And it did contain sections on sanctions. And I think it's very sad if KCC feels it cannot release a draft with draft written all over it to receive some comments. Because when it's been agreed by KCC, and when it's been approved by, I presume, their audit committee, and when it comes to Maidstone, then to say it's a fait accompli may be a bit strong, but it must be heading in that direction. So I make a plea, and maybe we need to go through our coding council, I don't know. I do not understand why we cannot receive a draft. Hasn't KCC got the capacity to actually absorb constructive comments? So I thank you very much indeed for your answer, but I do ask that pressure is applied on KCC to release the latest draft. Thank you.
Sorry? Yeah, thank you, Councillor Cooling. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. To be honest, if I put my parish councillor's hat on, our reaction was very similar, I think, to the one you just expressed about the original proposal draft. So yeah, I'm just thinking aloud here, and a little bit off piece, but I as chairman of this group, I would be happy to put some pressure on KCC, if everybody is reasonably happy with that, and to do, I would certainly do that, because I do feel very strongly that, you know, what you said, I think has a lot of relevance. So yeah, okay. Councillor Cox.
Chairman, if I could just assist a little further, my understanding, and I'm not on this group as yet, but Kent Secretaries, which is every authority's monitoring officer, has been given a draft, and they have included comments which covered the ones that members put forward when they first saw the LGA code. So hopefully that goes some way to assist.
Thank you, yes, but I don't know if I'm speaking myself here. I haven't seen any draft myself, and we as the elected councillors, I think, are entitled to have some input into that. So I do think it's a valid point that's been made, and I would like to, I will pursue it, yes. Councillor Garton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, the points I wanted to raise have already been raised by Councillor Cooling. I was confused about the preliminary test as well, what that actually means. And from my understanding, if we are deciding a case on a preliminary test, it would be a question of law. We would have to decide whether we take the case forward rather than a question of fact. And from what I can read at 2.7, we don't have a description of bullying, so there's no definition of bullying. So hence my question, how has the preliminary test applied in all these bullying cases which have been mentioned at 2.6?
I look to the screen. Is there any answer to that?
Chairman, it's quite a long list, but the legal jurisdiction tests are set out in the procedure on receipt of a complaint, which is at page 186 of the Constitution. And it's things like, did the alleged conduct occur before the code was adopted? Was the person complained of acting in an official capacity at the time of the alleged complaint? A list like that. So they are items that can be distinguished from the information that we're given with the complaint. I hope that assists, but we will send an email with the full detail to you.
Okay, thank you for that. Does that meet your point?
It sort of answers my point, although I would be grateful as a substitute member if I could be included in that email trail.
Yes, absolutely, you should be.
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're only, that's not the right word, but we are required only to note this. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cox, it's these screens.
You said my name once and then you didn't.
Oh, I do apologise.
It's okay, that's fine. Can I just say, when you're reading this report, on page 16, you see that since the last report to this committee on the 15th of March, and then you look at the allegations for parish councillors, whoever they're for, and every single one of them was rejected, apart from the last one.
Yeah.
So they are putting something up and then saying we need to amend the code of conduct, but we haven't seen it. So I'm endorsing what's being said. We need to see this, or this really is just for noting and is almost pointless. We need to see it. We need to act upon it. We need to have clarity as to what's being amended and how each one of these has been rejected, or else putting it before us seems pointless. Thank you.
Yes, I do agree with you. And maybe at the next meeting we could have a further report on this, or a little bit more of an explanation, I think. Because I agree with you, Councillor Cox, I think it does need that. So if we could, if we're happy with that, I think we need a bit more detail here than we're getting.
Are we going to ask that as a recommendation, or so we make a recommendation?
Yeah, we'll make a recommendation.
We want this done
yeah.
by the next meeting, not have a look at it, then it comes back. We'll be February, March of next year otherwise. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we will obviously note the current report, and we will recommend that we have a further report, I think, setting out with greater detail the issues behind. I mean, I'm trying to think of the right words here, but
well, I think Peter Cooling had it. We need to see.
Peter had it in there. Yeah. Further explanation, maybe, of the decisions made is, that's basically it, isn't it? If we're happy to have something on those lines, then we put it. I think Debbie's got it, and that's brilliant. Okay, so are we all happy with that? Can we agree that? Okay, good. Right, now we will move on to agenda item 13. Now I'm going to make a slight change here because we've got agenda item 17, which I think is the urgent item, but it's basically the external auditor's progress report. One of the things that's happened, and I'm sure the officers will explain this in greater detail, but we do not yet have a complete external auditor's report. I think it's obviously there's pressure of work here and various issues. It is a kind of backhanded compliment, I take it, actually, because I think there are councils with more serious issues that perhaps have attracted a higher priority than ourselves. So that's how I see it. But at any rate, it is still, there's nothing, as far as I understand, untoward has been discovered. But nevertheless, we don't have a final clearance, if you like, from the external auditors. So what I was going to suggest is we take agenda item 13 and follow it up with agenda item 17. They are so closely linked that I think it would make sense. Is everybody happy with that? Great. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Chairman, could I just interrupt for a moment? You can see that there's been some activity going on here. We really cannot at the moment get the external auditor in onto the call. I think he does want to speak at the meeting, but would you bear with me if we adjourn for a few minutes to try and get him onto the call?
Yeah, I'm happy to. If everybody's happy, so we can get the thing.
Is that okay, members? If we
the technology
say
working.
5-10 minutes to do that. If we
Yeah.
manage to get him into the call sooner, obviously we'll get you back. Thank you.
If we fail, then we'll carry on with agenda item 13 and we can perhaps find some other means to do it. Okay. Just a few minutes. Okay, councillors, I'm going to restart because technology, I think, is slightly defeating us. So, but what I want to do is, you'll see agenda item 13, and we have agenda item 17, which is the progress report from the external auditor. They are really interlinked because the decision, I think, that we take, agenda item 17, kind of overrides what we originally were going to take under agenda item 13 because of the delay in the report, right? So what I was going to suggest is we will, I'll ask Ellie Dunnett, who's the head of finance, to introduce agenda item 13, and then we'll link in the paper on agenda item 17. If we can get the external auditor to come in, then we will, but I think we can probably make a decision without, okay? So I'll ask Ellie if you're ready to introduce. And if I've said something wrong, correct me. So.
Of course. Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Hope you can hear me okay. So following on from the Chairman's introduction just now, at the time of drafting the report for agenda item 13, we had understood that the audit had progressed sufficiently to enable the findings to be presented at this meeting, and for the accounts to be approved subject to minor amendments tonight. Unfortunately, we found out after the agenda had been published that this wasn't the case, which is why we're now recommending that the approval of the accounts be deferred until the committee's meeting in November, which is the recommendation that you'll see with agenda item 17. This will unfortunately mean that we will miss the statutory deadline for publishing our audited accounts, which is the 30th of September. We understand from our auditors that this will be the case for a large proportion of local authorities around the country. In terms of the implications of that, there isn't any significant practical issues like fines or penalties that we need to consider. However, any protracted delays could result in operational challenges for officers who are involved with the audit. So agenda item 17 is a progress update rather than a findings report from our external auditors, and that just sets out the status of the audit for the 2021 financial statements. So the recommendation, as I've said, we've included with the urgent update report to defer the approval of the accounts to the November meeting supersedes the recommendations that were with the agenda item 13. The main reasons for the delays to the audit were the late start date. So this year work didn't commence until late August, which is considerably later than it's ever started in previous years. Also, the burden of additional requirements which the auditors now need to fulfill as part of their work has resulted in overruns on their other audits, which started before ours. So we're working closely with Grant Thornton to ensure that the audit is completed as soon as possible. At this stage, we understand that there aren't any significant audit findings to report. The updated version of the accounts is there in your agenda packs under agenda item 13, and that does reflect a small number of minor updates to the draft which came to your last meeting. Those accounts will now be brought back to the meeting in November for approval. So obviously I'd planned to hand over to Trevor Greenlee from Grant Thornton to introduce his report at Appendix 1 to agenda item 17. Unfortunately, I gather that some technical issues have prevented that. He has asked me to send his apologies and has undertaken to try and arrange to speak with the chair later in the week. I'll be very happy to take any questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. Yeah, if he wants to contact me in any way, then I'm happy to speak at any time, so that would not be a problem. Does anybody have any questions they wish to raise at this stage? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just looking at page 95 on the agenda, the table at the top, the figure that sort of leaps off the page at me is a very significant change in the collection fund adjustment account from a deficit of 26,000 to a deficit of 13 million. I know there's a reference to that on page 98, but could you just clarify for me what that is? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thank you for your question, Councillor. So the collection fund, as you've noticed, is carrying a huge deficit for 2021. The main reason that arose is the way that we account for collection fund income, and the reliefs that were subsequently announced after we'd kind of budgeted for that. So if you think back to the business rates COVID-19 reliefs that were introduced at the start of 2021, that actually took a huge amount of business rates away from the collection fund, which only reflects the income that we collect from taxpayers. So that's why it's gone into deficits. We did receive a significant amount of Section 31 grant that offsets that, and that will be paid back into the collection fund over the coming years. It's complicated in terms of presentation because of the timing issues with how the collection fund accounting arrangements work, and the statutory arrangements associated with that, which mean that we don't pay that Section 31 grant into the collection fund. That gets paid into our general fund, and then our general fund will repay the collection fund over the coming years. It is quite complicated in terms of its presentation, but hopefully that kind of answers your question. Feel free to come back if not.
Yeah, thank you. One other minor point on page 24, it's item 3.2. It says if the committee chose not to approve the statement of accounts, well, that's suggesting in the past, but actually still current, so it needs to be if the committee choose not to approve. Thanks.
Okay, that's noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm half hidden by the plastic. If I could refer you, Chairman, and members to page 104, you probably think I'm a bit like a dog with a bone, but I think it's worth pointing out. It's good to see that the value of assets of the pension scheme have gone up in the last 12 months or until 2021 by 28.9%. I mean, it's obviously a movable feast value of assets. But then the deficit, the liabilities have gone up to 89,783, which is nearly a 22% increase in the liability. Now, the comment underneath, I mean, the reason I'm raising this, because in a private company, we would be having the heebie-jeebies seeing this sort of figure. It says at the bottom, the paragraph below, the total liability of 89.783 million has a substantial impact on the net worth of the council as recorded in the balance sheet. However, statutory arrangements for funding the deficit mean the financial position of the council remains healthy. Now, that's fine. I'm not disputing, there's no illegality or anything like that. I'm not saying anything like that at all. What I am saying is, does the committee know what the statutory arrangements for funding the deficit are? Because I think at a point like this, it needs to be looked at quite forensically to make sure that we do all have our ducks in the row, because the liability is increasing year on year. And then it goes on to say the deficit on the local government scheme will be made good by increased contributions over the remaining working life of employees. Is there any indication of what sort of contribution increase is going to be imposed on employees and when? Thanks.
I can come back on that question, if that would help. So in terms of funding the deficit on the pension liability, we have a triennial valuation, which is a separate exercise to the accounting exercise that's used to produce these numbers. That works out a primary rate of contribution, which will be a percentage of our payroll, and then our secondary rate, which is the back funding, which is the arrangements referred to here for funding the deficit. That assumes that the deficit will be repaid over a period of 16 years. At the moment, that stands at about just over £1 million a year that we pay in addition to our primary contributions as an employer. Obviously, that figure gets updated every 3 years, every time we have a revaluation, and we continue to fund the deficit in the same way, usually with that same assumption of it being repaid over the next 16 years. In terms of budgeting for that, we've made sort of further assumptions in our medium-term financial strategy about where those numbers are going to go. The next triennial valuation will be in 2023-24, and we've allowed for an increased level of contribution, recognising that there will be a risk of that. Thank you.
Peter, does that...
Sorry, maybe I missed something. About the contributions, is there any idea of what kind of percentage or increase that might be?
So in terms of the forward position, we've allowed for an increase in our annual contributions of 150,000, which is in percentage terms in line with the increase we saw at the last triennial valuation. It is very difficult to forecast where these actuarial assumptions will take us, but yeah, that's the figure we've allowed for, an annual sort of incremental increase of 150,000 per year over those next 3 years from 23-24.
I was wondering whether at some point, and not now, I don't want to detain us now, but this pensions reserve figure, I'm looking at page 95, the table at the top, which has gone from 74 million up to 90. Could we be briefed on what the major assumption changes are that the actuaries have used to give rise to such a substantial change? So not now, but may we please, and I may have missed it in this report, could we have an overview of where the actuaries' view of the world, view of employees, view of life expectancy, etc., have changed over the 3 years? Thank you.
Yes, certainly the actuaries always produce like an accounting report, which is an explanatory note that goes with the numbers that sets out all of those things, like their assumptions that they've used in arriving at those figures. So I'd be happy to circulate that to members by email if that would be useful.
I mean, we could have it as part of when we meet in November, we could have it on the table if we wanted to. So then we could debate it. Would that be okay to do that? I'm sure. If you've got the figures. So it is an important
to have
issue.
it as an agenda item?
Yeah, yeah. I quite like to see it myself, because the problem with defined benefit schemes is the liability is pretty, mouth-watering, it can be. So I think we need to keep tabs on it, yeah. Okay. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Councillor Garden.
I think we are sort of finding ourselves between a rock and a hard place, because this report, these accounts sort of rely a little bit, and it says in the executive summary, relies on the external auditor's findings, and we don't really have any sufficient external auditor findings yet. So, I mean, I'm only a layperson, I'm not an accountant. As politicians are generalists, that means we've got difficulties to actually trust these figures without having a second opinion on it. And that's why I think it's very difficult for us to accept these accounts tonight. On the other hand, obviously, we will have a statutory requirement to accept these accounts, and we already passed this deadline. So whatever way we accept these accounts tonight should be with a strong caveat that we haven't seen the external auditor's report yet.
I was going to come in on that. We're not going to accept the accounts tonight. They're going to be, I'm going to propose, as set out very clearly, and Ellie Dunnett said it, agenda item 17, that the approval of the statement of accounts be deferred because we do not have the external auditors, and we can't approve something that doesn't have the blessing of the external auditor. But as was said, that we, at the moment, we do not think there's anything untoward in the figures. So that is something I think we can rest reasonably assured on. And we have Rich here sitting next to me, our internal auditor, who also keeps a watching brief on the soundness of the finances of this council. So I'm reasonably relaxed about that, but we can't formally approve until we have the qualification or unqualification, hopefully, of the external auditor. So that's where I would be coming. But I do have one or two questions I want to ask myself on just a general presentation figure. But do you want to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, are you just saying that we are deferring item 13 as well as 17 then?
Yes, yeah, well, that's what I said right at the beginning. Yeah. Okay, look, I've got just a few points which I just wanted to highlight myself. On page 28, where you've got the key facts about Maidstone, the presentation does jump around a bit. So we got sort of, in one case, we got 2020 and 2019. Then we go 2019, 2018. Then on where we got council revenue generated locally, we got 2021 and the percentage of 2014-15. I just think it needs tidying up a bit to be a bit more consistent. I realise some things, these are either typos or they creep in, but that was just my first comment. My second comment was that you use a term unusable reserves. Could you explain what that really actually means in terms of what it supports? And the third comment I have is on page 54, you make a comment about there are no finance leases. So everything seems to be off balance sheet. Could you just explain a little bit more on that one? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So your first point, that's something we can take away and look at. I know that some of the numbers, why the dates are a little bit irregular in terms of the presentation of the numbers, it's to do with when the data becomes available. So some of that is just presenting the latest information that we have and a comparator, and the more up-to-date kind of information isn't there for us to include yet, but yeah, we can have another look at that. Your second point on unusable reserves, so they're things that generally arise from accounting adjustments or statutory arrangements. They're money that it's not money that we can spend. It's presented in financial terms, but it can't be spent. It's just generally picking up the other side of an adjustment, like a revaluation or our pensions liability in the case of the pensions reserve, and it's there for a statutory reason or for accounting purposes to ensure that balance sheet balances. They are subject to audit, but as I say, they don't impact on the spending power of the council. The finance leases, yeah, I mean, we have reviewed that against the accounting standards and we don't have any. We have had some in the past, I think generally vehicles, but I know there's been a programme of looking to purchase those vehicles as the leases come to an end. We don't have any property leases that would constitute a finance lease. So Yeah, and that all of our IT equipment we purchase rather than lease. So I don't know if my colleague Paul would add anything to that regarding the finance leases, but yeah, that's where we are based on our review against standards. Thank you.
No, nothing really to add to that. We have assessed various leases just to check, and yeah, as Ellie said, we didn't come to the conclusion that any were classed as finance leases. So.
We need to, if there's no more questions, sorry, Councillor Cox, I do apologise.
Just a point of clarification, really. Councillor Garton just said, are we deferring both items 13 and 17? Are you actually saying that, or do we have to approve put forward what's on 17, because it says about the deferral of the item to the 15th of November? So are we generally ignoring item 13 completely because it's superseded by 17, or do we have to look at both of them for recommendations?
Well, the way I took it, and maybe I'm totally wrong on this, is that item 13 will come back again in the November meeting, and it will probably have a similar type of thing. So what I was going to suggest is, in a sense, we can. Our approval really is to defer, which is an item 17, and that pretty well covers item 1 of the agenda item 13, and of course 2, 3 and 4 then all follow from item 1 on 13. So if we say we defer agenda item 13, defer it, effectively with that we're deferring agenda item 13, but doing it under 17.
And then propose 17, which we voted on, which would defer it. Okay.
Are we all happy with that? I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but okay. I would propose that we defer, as set out in agenda item 17, that we agree to defer to the next meeting, so that we will have the order. Yep. Are we all agreed on that? Yeah, agreed. Okay. And obviously, we note the external auditor's progress report today, which is fairly, which is okay. All right. Councillor Cooling, did you want the floor, sir?
Just to offer a comment, if we've been difficult as a committee, which hopefully we haven't been, I think we would like to record, if you agree with me, that I personally have a high degree of confidence in the finance unit at NBC, with the internal auditor at its back, and in combination with the external auditors. So our questions, I do not think, are criticism of quality. We're just anxious to understand. I do think there's a good finance regime from what I can see in the borough.
Well, from the chair, I totally endorse that, and I think Councillor Daly and I are probably the two longest serving members on this audit committee, and I've always been very, I should say, as a councillor of Maidstone Borough Council, I've always been quite proud of our council and the way it handles its finances. I think, it does a very, very good job, and we've got a very good team of people doing it, and I think that works very, very well. So I am very confident that we will get a clean bill of health. Famous last words, of course, but I'm sure we will. Okay, so we'll move on then to agenda item 14, which is the Internal Audit Charter, and I'll hand over to Rich Clark, who's our head of Internal Audit.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Apologies for my late arrival at the meeting this evening, but I have been kept up to date during the adjournment. The paper that you have in front of you this evening, those of you who've been to this committee before will be familiar, because my raising it, that we seek to follow at all times public sector internal audit standards. Those standards are by design principles based, and they leave a lot of the mechanics of the specifics of how internal audit works to the discretion of individual organisations, as is right given the vast range of circumstances that exist. So the standards require individual organisations to draw up an internal audit charter, which fundamentally is the document that translates the principles-based audit standards into the operational mechanics of how, in the context of Maidstone Borough Council, Who will audit report to? What will it report? What areas will it cover? What independent safeguards will exist safe to ensure its objectivity? And how will it maintain and report on its expertise? So all of these areas are covered in the Internal Audit Charter. Certainly if you were in this committee 2 years ago, this will be extremely familiar to you as a document because it has changed very little since 2019. Partly because one of the very, very minor and rightly not commented on effects of the pandemic is all of the regulatory bodies stopped doing their regular updates of guidance and everything. So much of the surrounding guidance for this is unchanged since 2019. But also members will be familiar that we underwent an external quality assessment in 2020 that found us to be fully conforming with standards, which included a judgment that our charter was fully conforming with standards. So given that it had that blessing from SIPFA, given that we continue to enjoy strong support from members and officers in the council, it's right that I bring this document back to this committee periodically to put this question to you. But certainly it's unchanged because I believe that the way that we undertake internal audit at Maidstone Borough Council continues to conform with standards and continues to meet the needs of the council. But I'm very happy to take any comments or questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Well, let me say from the chair straight away, I totally endorse the work you do. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's a very, very fine internal audit department and I think we're very lucky to have it. So, Councillor Garton.
Yes, I can only echo what you said, Mr. Chairman. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I think we can quite happily approve this.
If there are no more questions, I'll move from the chair to approve this. And does everybody agree with that? Agreed? Thank you, Rich. That was one of the quicker presentations you've done. Okay. Yeah. Right, let's move on. Oh yes, page 131, which is on my figures here. This is we do an annual report to the council on the work that we've undertaken as a committee, and I think I'll ask Jen Morrillo to introduce, if you like.
Thank you, Chairman. So the purpose of this report is to outline and review the work of the Audit Governance Standards Committee, and this is done every year. Councillor Perry has kindly provided a foreword this year as the chair of the committee, highlighting the success of the committee during the year 2021. The committee has been well attended, which you'll see on page 138 by members, and has also been, those members have been appropriately supported by officers during those meetings. Page 140 shows the range of the activities covered by the committee, and also that's 139.
Yes.
Highlights the range of activity covered by the committee, and page 440 draws out the sources of assurance the committee has relied upon during the year. So our conclusion is that the committee has effectively discharged its duties during the year 2020-21, and I will take any questions if there are any.
Thank you for that. I think it's a very clear report, and I will present this to the council tomorrow, isn't it? Yes, tomorrow. And I think the page 139, that table showing the activities, is extremely useful actually, and I think it's well done. So it's a very clear report, and I commend it to everybody. I don't think we have to do. Oh, do you agree with the report? Are we all agreed? Oh, and the report is sent. Oh, sorry, Councillor Cumming, I didn't see that.
Yeah, just one point on that table on page 139, the fourth column, I believe that should be January 2021.
Oh, I missed that.
Thank you, I'll amend that.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh dear. Yes, okay. Yes, you are right. It's well spotted. Well spotted, Mike. Yeah, okay, we can alter that. Well, or hope the council misses it. That's the other one. That's the other option we've got. I'll speak to it tomorrow anyway, so there shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so we've all agreed that, and the report will go to the full council tomorrow. Okay, excellent. And we then go on to agenda item 16. Okay, which is the budget strategy risk assessment update. Do we have Mark Green on the call?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Oh, you're there. My goodness gracious. I'll hand over.
Yes, I apologise. I apologise, members, for not being able to join you this evening. Shall I introduce the report?
Yes, please, Mark, from West Wales or wherever you are, a remote part of the country, yes.
Sure, will do. This is the regular report that I provide on risks to the Council's budget strategy, and I'll just draw out a few key points. First of all, the budget monitoring that has taken place so far this year suggests that we are on budget. Clearly, we're only halfway through the year, but the projections currently are showing a small underspend for the year. So that's positive news. But I would like to just draw your attention to a couple of risk areas. The first is around business rate collection, where for the first quarter we saw a fall off in relation to the target, and the fear is that the position may get worse as the year goes on, as the level of central government relief for businesses falls away. So that is certainly a risk, both generally and also for our income from the Kent Business Rates Pool. And the other one that I would like to flag up is the risk of inflation. The August inflation figures showed 3.2%, and the hope is that that will come back down to the Bank of England's target rate of 2%, but it's not clear that that will happen anytime soon. And the risk with inflation is that it affects all of the council's inputs, and we are constrained by the amount by which council tax can be put up. Last year, the referendum limit was 2%. If it's 2% again, inflation is running at a higher figure. That would mean the council having to make real terms cuts. So that's a risk more for the future than for the current financial year, but I wanted to just highlight that for members. So I'll leave it at that, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you for that. You've actually highlighted the point that I was going to make myself, that I think the one area on the risk assessment is inflation. It is something we need to obviously bear in mind, and not panic at this stage, but at least bear in mind that this may be an issue that we might have to consider. So does anybody have any questions on this? Councillor Cooling.
I'd like to point at clause 2.10, 2.10, Just to read a couple of lines, the Treasury advisors expect bank rate to remain at 0.1% throughout the rest of 2021-2 and 2022-3. However, the rise in CPI inflation to 3.2% in August, etc., increases the likelihood of an earlier tightening of monetary policy. Maybe it's not for this evening, but that assumption of 0.1% remaining for the next year and a half looks increasingly heroic given comments in the press. And if we are at risk, the borough is at risk through not being able to finance its capital programme, if it's suddenly caught short like Northern Rock was by relying too long on short-term financing, then this borough will be embarrassed. So I don't know when we next get a Treasury advisor's report to this committee, but I personally think that they're an outlier in terms of their assumption. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooling. I think that is an issue you've raised, and I think we need, particularly this committee, that we need to keep a very close watch on that. I'm quite sure Mark is aware of it as well, so we need to bear it in mind. I have the same concerns, to be perfectly honest. So we will keep a watching brief on it. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, I'm just adding to the choir, really. We've said this before. If we're going to consider it, we know where we know what we've got to borrow because of the capital projects before us. I think this is a very dangerous backgammon game, playing back game. We know what we've got to do. The amount of money we're talking about, I think, is too dangerous to leave. And to rely on us being able to do it. Yes, we could convene to agree, whatever, but I don't know how Mark sleeps at night, really, because there's so many things he's got to consider. So I would just find it better to know that we've got the capital to do what we want to do with it, and the small amount, if we fix it, the small amount that we've got to hold that fix without spending it, I think will outweigh what they could do overnight with 0.1%, 0.2, whatever. They can do that. Mark and I have sat in London, and the previous night they put it up. So he knows exactly where I'm coming from. But I'm just joining the throng, really, I think, with the chairman and Councillor Cooling.
Can I come back on that, Chair, and just respond?
Sorry, Councillor Garden? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to respond to Councillor Cox. A couple of things. First of all, we do to what's happening very closely, and noting what members have said and the risk of interest rates going up, it is likely that we will be borrowing from the PWRB. However, we're not allowed to borrow in advance of need. We do need to link the borrowing to capital expenditure, so we can't simply go out and borrow 100 million if that's the capital borrowing requirement. So in conclusion, I'd like to reassure members we are monitoring this very closely, but we're not in a position where we can simply go out and borrow now to fund the whole of the future capital programme of the council.
Yeah, point is taken. Yes, Councillor Cooling.
May I just comment? This point about not borrowing in advance of need, I understand that. But if there are capital projects which have been signed off by council, they're committed, there is a need. So is it semantics, or is there some particular point of legislation that stops us getting money in the bank to meet absolute commitments? Thank you.
Mark, do you have any comment on that point? Because I think it's quite an important point.
Certainly, we can't say just because something is in the capital programme that we're committed to spending the money. It is going to be related to when contracts are entered into, and clearly as we embark on more capital investment, we will take the opportunity to fund that long term as appropriate, but we're not in a position to immediately, but as I've said, it's something that we're monitoring very closely, and as the capital programme progresses, we will be borrowing from the PWRB.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a question then? On that point then, Mark, if we were to start a project, what element does the government consider as starting something? If we have paid for advice, architectural drawings, all that sort of stuff, to me, that is started. The project has started. Or am I trying to find a crack where there isn't one?
In percentage terms, the amount spent on fees, feasibility studies and so on will be relatively small. The major commitment is where you sign a contract with your main contractor or whatever, and that's the point at which it's appropriate to borrow.
I suspect this committee is likely to hear a few more complaints about parish councils in this case, because Public Works Loan Board, we're a small parish, but we've been engaged with 3 loans, and there were no, am I guilty? There were no contracts signed. It was a clear commitment, parish council decision to do it without contracts signed. So again, sorry to be difficult, but I think if this were the private sector, it would not get quite so held up with the definition of need. If it's in the capital programme, if the council has given commitment to go ahead, if it's devoting resources, human resources, and as Councillor Cox has said, design this, that and the other, if there's clear commitment, surely there must be a way to duck and dive, wriggle, call it what you will, to get the money in the bank. Thank you.
Have we not been using money from our reserves before? We've been holding off and holding off. So we've had projects in the capital spend that we've used monies from new homes bonus. I'm grabbing at straws here, I'm not being precise, but I'm saying that we could have looked at that money and put it for another project. And if this is out and out capital expenditure, such as buying property, buying land, I just think it's almost accounting. We're saying we've used that from what we physically had rather than borrow. You can have money in reserves and borrow, it's just how you're showing you're using that money. I think that's, I'm not an accountant, please don't understand.
Yeah, I have to say I am slightly nervous. I'm sorry, Councillor Cooling. I understand where you're coming from with the Parish Council, but we have a very, I said it earlier this evening, we have quite a strong tradition of very sound finances in this council. I certainly wouldn't want to risk that at all. So I think I understand where you're coming from, and I think we may need to perhaps look at this a bit more closely, but we've still got to take a reasonably, we've got public money here, so we're on a much bigger scale than parish, and I think we need to bear that one in mind as well. I would hate us, we're not in a position of a private company where we can take the risk, perhaps a greater risk, for a greater profit maybe, but we're in a slightly different position here, I think. So, yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I understand. I think what Councillor Cox and what you said, we'll need to look at this, but I think we need to be just a little bit cautious. That's all I would say. Okay. Are there any other points anybody wishes to make? Because we're only required, I keep saying that, to note the updated risk, which I think we've probably done. Yes, Councillor Garton.
Yeah, if I may just come back to Appendix A on page 151, the matrix. Looking at the current news and the situation and things in the world, we are coming to a much more unpredictable time, and I think we should get another risk factor into this table, i.e. I would call it maybe supplier problems or contingency generally. I mean, we are all aware of the fuel crisis this week. There are other problems. Container ships are being delayed from China, so our depot in Parkwood may not get mower blades for next spring when they need it. And most importantly, which is on my agenda, is bin collections. If there's anything going pear-shaped, be it Brexit-related or anything else, the bin collection is the first one to suffer. So while I wouldn't put that category as high as P at the moment, the reoccurrence of COVID, it needs to be somewhere in the middle of this table as an independent risk factor of external circumstances which this council may face in these very unpredictable times.
May I suggest that's Donald Rumsfeld's known unknowns and unknown unknowns.
I think on those famous words, there's no more comments. I will close the meeting on that very happy note. We've agreed to note this updated risk. Okay? Well, thanks everybody. It's been a very useful meeting, and thank you for everybody on the screens, and thank you officers as well, all of you. I know you do a very good job on this, so thank you again. Yeah.
We always finish at 7:50.
Is it?